Hello everyone and welcome to a new video on the Future Programmer YouTube channel. Today's video will start chapter 3 of the Java Basics course, which is all about methods in Java programming. Today, you will be introduced to the concept of methods, so what is a method, and you'll learn about the individual components that each method has. So without further ado, let's get started. Today's lesson starts our investigation on methods in Java, which is a very central and important concept, not just in Java, but in many programming languages in the world. So what is a method, first of all? Well, a method is a block of code which we can call to run. And the advantage of using methods is doing so will allow us to define a procedure, a routine, a set of instructions once, and then we can use these instructions many times just by calling the method. So let's think about a scenario of making a burger. We would write a Java program to do that, and let's pretend that Java now has the necessary component to make a burger. We can first put down bread, and then we will put down some ingredients. And then we'll put down another piece of bread. And I am not very knowledgeable on making burgers, so let's just leave it at that simplified version of it. And we can do bread, ingredient, bread, and then bread, ingredients, bread many times to make many burgers. But this can make our program somewhat crowded with a bunch of tiny components of making burgers. So what we can do is we can define a method. And in the method, we will define a procedure, which is putting down a bread, putting down some ingredients, and then putting down another piece of bread. And to make a burger, we can just call this method, and Java will run all the code inside of this burger making method. We'll put down breads, put down ingredients, put down bread, and we can call this method as many times as we want. And you may ask, why don't we just use a for loop or perhaps a while loop? Well, a method offers some advantage over using loops. They're actually very different things because a method can actually take inputs and make outputs. And this is the topic of our next video where we're going to talk about parameters and returning values from methods. But these are things that set methods apart from control structures like loops. So let's now talk about methods in Java. The syntax of a method in Java can appear somewhat confusing and intimidating at first. So let's first take a look at the big picture of a method and then break it down into smaller pieces. This is the syntax of a method in Java. We would write some modifiers, and these are going to be things that will give methods different properties. We'll talk later on in this course about different modifiers, but for now, just know that we write public static in the place of modifiers. So we'll start off writing a method with the words public and then static. And then comes the return type of our method. So this is going to be the topic of our next lesson, but this is essentially the data type that our method will return. Since the methods that we'll be writing today will not return anything at all, we'll just write void, which is to say we are not returning anything. And now comes the method name. This is the identifier, the way how we can tell Java that we're calling this method or referring to this method. It's kind of like a variable name, how we can define a variable called whatever we want to call it, right? We can call it f, we can call it z, we can call it h, we can call it my variable, we can call it a variable that has a super long name. So this is going to follow the same naming conventions as variables. So we cannot have spaces, we can have letters and number digits, and we can have the underscore, and usually we write this in lower camel case. So all the words after the first one will have an uppercase first letter. And after the method name, we will write a pair of parentheses. Inside, we'll put the parameter list. This is going to be a list of inputs that we're passing into the method name, or rather, a list of inputs that this method can accept. We'll talk about this in the next lesson as well, so don't worry about it for now, and just leave this blank. And then we put a pair of curly brackets. This is going to indicate that everything in between these curly brackets will be the method's body. And in fact, this return statement, which is optional, we won't have to worry about it today, this is actually also part of our method's body. This is the procedure, the set of instructions we're putting inside of our method. So if we have a method for making burgers, we can have public static void make burgers, and then we'll take perhaps some inputs like the type of the burger, but we'll leave that for the next lesson. So inside of our method curly brackets, our method body would be put down bread, put down ingredients, put down another piece of bread. So now let's practice identifying method components using this hopefully quite familiar looking method down below. So name the components of this method, and feel free to look at these bullet points if they would help you, or perhaps this one code block right here. So take a few minutes to think about what is this, and come back to this video when you're done. So I hope this is pretty easy. So we have public static. This is going to be the modifiers. This will tell Java that our method, this main method, this is the method name, it will tell Java that our method is going to be public and static. We'll talk about those later on in this course, so don't worry about them for now. Void is going to be our return type, and since there is nothing returned from this method, we're just printing something out, nothing will be returned, so we write void. And then we write main. This is the method name. So this is how we can identify our method. And then we have a pair of parentheses inside of which we write string, square brackets, and then args. So what this is saying is that we have a parameter that the main method can accept called args, and it is of data type a string array. We'll talk about those later on. So this is just a parameter, basically. Inside of our curly brackets, we write system.out.println. What are the parts of this method? This is the method's body. So essentially, this main method is going to print this out. So now let's write our first Java method, which will simply print something out. So we can write public static void. This is again the modifiers and our void return type. And then we can name our method. As the naming convention goes, we write first, all in lowercase, and our second word will have a capitalized first letter, M. So first method. We can clearly tell that this is one word, and this is our second word of our name. It will not take any parameters, and we have a pair of curly brackets. Inside we print, this is our first method. Something to note is that when we define methods, we do so outside of our main method. So this is going to be alongside the same level as our main method, because main, after all, is also a method. So if I copy this code into an online Java editor like Replit, we can see we have the main method here. And after the main method, we can define our new method called first method. So public static void first method like this. So this would actually not go inside of our main method like how we usually write our code. This will be on the same level, as you can see, as our main method, but still inside of our class, which is another advanced topic we'll cover later on in this course. Running this code, we should see hello world printed out because that's inside of our main method, but nothing else. Well, the reason for that is we only defined the method. We're defining the instructions. We are telling Java we have these instructions that are kind of binded to this method. But we never told Java to run these instructions. We have to call a method for it to run. But before we get to how to call a method, let's first practice writing a Java method that literally can do anything. So if you want to just print something out, or maybe declare a variable, or perhaps do a combination of multiple things, go ahead. So write a Java method that does something. And this shouldn't be there. It should be write a Java method that does something or anything, right? So take a few minutes to do that, and I'll show you a sample solution when you come back. All right, so here is one out of the infinite number of different methods that you could have written for this practice problem. So we have public static void a method. So this is going to be, again, a public and static method that returns nothing. And it will have a name called a method. You could have chosen any name, really, as long as it follows the naming rules. It takes no parameters. It has curly brackets. Inside, we have int a is equal to 3, semicolon, int b is equal to 4, semicolon, system.out.print a plus b. And really, you could have put anything in here. You could have put an if statement, or perhaps multiple if statements, or perhaps a loop. You could have put anything in here, but this is just an example of a method. So let's copy this code into our online editor. So I'm going to paste the code right here. And you can see this is, as was the case with the first method, this is inside of our class main, the curly bracket and here, but it is outside of our main method, and it is the same level kind of as our main and first methods. Running this code, we should see hello world printed out. Nothing else is printed out. So now let's talk about calling Java methods. So when we define a method, we have created a set of instructions for Java to carry out, but calling it is what's telling Java to execute these instructions. So when we want to call a method, we can just write method name, and then in parentheses, we put the parameters. And we'll talk about parameters later on, so don't worry about them for now. Method name, parameters, semicolon. So when we want to call our method from before our first method, we can just write first method, parentheses, since there's no inputs that it takes, and then semicolon. And we will do so inside of our main method. Now let me pause for a moment and talk about what is so special about our main method, why it's always there in our programs. Well, the main method is going to be a method that Java always runs. So it's kind of the entry point of any Java program. And you can have some instructions, some code in here that Java will go directly to when we run a program. So in this case, when we run this entire program, Java will go to our main method, run everything inside. Nothing outside will be run unless it's called. So when we call a method, first method, we can just write first method, parentheses, semicolon. So when we go to the main method, we'll print out hello world, and then we will go to first method, we'll jump down here and run the code inside of our first method. Let me actually get rid of the, you know what, I can leave hello world right here actually. So let me just run this, and we should see hello world. This is our first method. Indeed, we get the output. This is our first method when we call first method. So now let's take a moment to think about how we can run our own method that you defined in this exercise. You could have written a completely different method than what I have shown here, but you can still call the method in our main method after the first method, or before, if you would so desire. So take a moment to do that. And you would probably do something like this. So we write a method. This is our method name, parentheses, semicolon. And then now if I run this program, we should see hello world, and we see this is our first method, and then we'll see 7. And since we use print right here, we get this yellow thing right after our 7 instead of on a different line. So everything is working exactly how we want it to work. And the reason, again, why we use methods is typically we can have a method that is as long as we would want it to be. So we can have a method that is 1,000 lines long that does a specific thing. And when we want to do this one thing, we can just call this method and Java will run the code inside of that method. Methods is really one of the central pillars of programming, not just Java programming, but any programming. So it is good practice to separate individual components of a program into their own methods, which we can call to run. This way we know exactly where bugs may appear. When we run a method and we see some error show up, then we know exactly which method it is in. And really, the things that we talked about today is quite a lot of information, so it may not appear as intuitive as you want it to be right now. But as you practice more, as you practice writing more Java programs, you'll get quite familiar with using methods. In the next few videos of this course, we'll take a closer look at the individual components of Java methods. And there you have it, methods in Java programming. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel down below. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section as well. And with that said, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in future videos.